If he was to come to this earth at this very moment and to preach the message that he preached some 2,000 years ago, he would be labeled a radical. He would be labeled a racist. And chances are pretty good that he would be arrested. And you know what? That's exactly what happened to him some 2,000 years ago because of the message that he was preaching. There are people that if you look at them and you say, you know what? Jesus Christ is the only way to heaven. You're going to be laughed at. You're going to be mocked. You're going to be ridiculed. Because to say that there is only one way into heaven is a very, very unpopular statement. I was talking to a guy one time, this has been several years ago, and we were talking about this very thing, about Jesus being the only way to heaven. And he had this illustration, and it was kind of a good illustration, but he believed that there was more than one way to heaven. And he said, here's the thing. He said, think about this for a second, Joe. He said, if we were to go to an airport, and we were flying someplace, he said, you could fly Southwest, I could fly Delta, somebody else could fly another airplane or whatever you want. He said there's many different airplanes out there. You could get on and you could go, and we would all reach the same destination. There's many ways that you could fly different airliners and still arrive at the same destination. And I told him, I said, yeah, I mean, I guess in the grand scheme of things, that makes sense. But here's the deal. You don't know that airplane that you're flying on is going to make it to that destination. It could run out of gas and crash. It could be diverted because of weather. It could have mechanical problems. There's all kinds of things that could go wrong on that particular flight. None of them can guarantee you 100% arrival at that destination. None of those airplanes can guarantee you 100% that you are going to arrive at your destination. But Jesus Christ can guarantee you a 100% chance of arrival to a place called heaven. He's the only one that can do that. Jesus is the only way that you and I could enter into a place called heaven. The reality of it is most Americans in this country doesn't believe that it really matters what you believe. I was shocked to read the statistics of professing Christians that believe that there is more than one way into heaven. Do you believe that 43% of people who profess to be saved, profess to be Christians, believe that Jesus is not the only way to heaven? They believe that you can take many other routes. You know, for Jesus or any of us to insist here that there's just one way into heaven is a completely radical concept. It's a completely radical thought. But I want you to look again here in verse 24. He didn't speak of different doors. He didn't speak of different airliners. He didn't say enter through one of the narrow doors. He spoke of the narrow door. And other scriptures confirm this. In John 14:6, it says, Jesus told him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. In Acts 4:12, he says, there is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given to people, and we must be saved by it. Listen, I'm going to misquote John 14:6. And this is the way most people want to interpret this passage. There are many ways into heaven. There are many ways into heaven. Jesus is one of the ways. Jesus is part of the truth. And he is one of the kind of life. No one comes to the Father unless they are religious, unless they are good, unless they are kind, unless they do missions, unless they work in the church. Listen to me. Jesus said he is the only way. Do you know him as your Lord and personal Savior. For decades, Billy Graham, he filled stadiums around the world where people would come just to listen to the gospel message. And he actually had a big banner placed wherever he preached, and it just simply said John 14:6 and what the passage said. And as you can think, or as you can imagine, many people thought he was too narrow-minded. Several years ago, and I don't remember when, but it was several years ago, he conducted this crusade in Melbourne, Australia. And a woman who was there wrote a letter of complaint. And her words were typical of many who didn't appreciate his message. And she wrote this. She said, "After hearing Billy Graham on the air, viewing him on television, I am heartily sick of the type of religion that insists my soul and everyone else needs saving, whatever that means. I have never felt that I was lost, nor do I feel that I wallow in the mire of sin, although his preaching insists that I do. Give me a practical religion that teaches gentleness and kindness and acknowledges no barriers of color, creed, that remembers the aged and teaches children about goodness and not about sin. If, in order to save my soul, I must accept such a philosophy as I have recently heard preached, I prefer to remain forever damned." Folks, sadly, that's the sentiment of many people. That's the sentiment of many people. You know what, one of the things, this is something that just, you don't hear the word sin talked about in church too much anymore. Because preachers don't like to talk about it. Why? Because that turns people away. People want to hear something that makes them feel good. People want to hear something that makes them feel like they've been included. And here's the real reality of it. People have grown so comfortable in living in their sin that if you say anything that challenges that, they don't want any part of it. Because people want to base their life on their feelings, on their emotions. If it makes me feel good, if it makes me happy, then it's right for me. And I have the right to decide what's right for me. Who are you? Who are you to tell me that I can't live my life in sin? Who are you to tell me that sex outside of marriage is wrong? Who are you to tell me that, even though I live a homosexual lifestyle, that that's wrong if it makes me feel? The Bible speaks very plainly about sin. From the moment that you and I were born, Psalm 51:5 says, "Surely from the time of my birth, from the moment my mother conceived me." Think about that. From the moment that you were conceived, you were sinful. From the very moment that you were conceived, you was on your way to a place called hell. But by God's grace and by God's mercy, He sent His one and only Son, that whosoever believeth in Him should not perish and have everlasting life. Folks, God does not want you to base your salvation experience on feeling. He doesn't want you to base your salvation on emotion. At that moment when I came to Christ, I was so emotional. I just wept and wept over my sin. But then 2 hours later, I was right back in it. Folks, when you come to Christ, it is a